Hey y'all, howdy, welcome to One for the Books. I'm Sandra Broadwell. Today is the tier ranking video of all of the fantasy and sci-fi content that I consumed in 2022. That includes books, movies, and TV shows. I'm not going to get too in-depth with the reviews of these things, but if you are more interested in my book reviews, I do have videos for all of those. And you can find the link to my spreadsheet of all the books that I read. And in that spreadsheet is a link to every video where I talk about the specific book that you might be interested in learning more about. So without further ado, let's get into the good stuff. I have 5 different rankings that I'm going to give. My first is from the rooftops, which means I just want to tell everyone about this book or this series or this movie. I just absolutely loved it and I can't stop talking about it. Number 2 is this is my jam. I absolutely love everything that's going to go into this category and it just makes me happy. Number 3 is reconsumable. My feelings on it might be a little mixed, but if the mood strikes me right, I will probably watch or read it again. Number 4 is not again. I might have enjoyed this while I was in the middle of it, but it's probably not something I'm ever going to rewatch or reread or think about very much again, ever. And then the 5th one is not worth it. I just super didn't enjoy my experiences with these things, and I'm definitely not going to be reconsuming them. The way this works, if you've never watched a tier ranking, is I put in images of everything that I consumed this year, and then this program scrambles it all so they're in no particular order whatsoever. I did attempt to make this slightly shorter by combining all of the series that I read into a singular series. So rather than ranking every single book in the 9 books of The Expanse, I'm just going to rank The Expanse series, for instance, as a singular entity. So hopefully that'll make it go a little faster. Okay, so starting with What If, which was a Marvel cartoon where every episode is like an alternate universe where things are different than they were in the Marvel movies. So it's not quite canon, but the stories were very fascinating. I absolutely loved it. There was only a couple episodes that I didn't think were just great, and they had really awesome animation and epic battle scenes and everything, so it was totally my jam. Next up is The Legend of Vox Machina, which is a cartoon that was made about the Critical Role campaign, which is a Matt Mercer D&D kind of podcast. I didn't listen to the podcast, but I love Dungeons and Dragons, and my brother listened to the show and really loved it. And so when I heard about the cartoon, I got really excited for it, and it was extremely violent and gory and obscene and hilarious. Totally my jam. The Sandman, which is a Netflix adaptation of a graphic novel series by Neil Gaiman. I love Neil Gaiman books most of the time and have never read any of his graphic novels, but I was excited about this and I thought it was really great. It wasn't a favorite of the year or anything, but I love gods and mythology and monsters and all that kind of stuff. So it was a super fun time, and I even really liked the couple of episodes at the end that were like not part of the season stories. Andor is the newest Star Wars show and absolutely the best Disney Star Wars show that they have done. I really enjoyed every episode of this and thought it was great. Disney's The Owl House. This is a cartoon that I have really enjoyed. I think in 2022, they finished season 2 and started season 3. I thought season 2 was fantastic, but I have not really been vibing with season 3 so far. Season 3 is not done and it's going to be continuing in 2023. So I'm just going to put this in reconsumable. I will definitely be watching the rest of season 3 and I would recommend this show. I'm just not sure how I feel about season 3 yet. The Name of the Wind. This is a stand-in for the Kingkiller Chronicles, which is 2 books by Patrick Rothfuss. I absolutely adore these stories. The writing is immaculate, but because the series is not complete, I'm just going to put it in This Is My Jam and not in From the Rooftops. The Blade itself is the first book in the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. I read the entire trilogy this year. I really enjoyed this series. It was grimdark and action-oriented, especially the 3rd book, but the 1st book was really light on plot and I didn't enjoy that as much. So even though I loved this series, it wasn't one of my favorites of the year. So it's gonna go, that's about where it's going to be. Red Sister, this is the first book in the Book of the Ancestor trilogy by Mark Lawrence. I loved this series. It was about a young girl named Nana who grows up in kind of a magical convent and is trained as like a assassin. So this is going to go right up here with the Kingkiller Chronicles. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, the book, I loved the writing style. I loved the story, but it was really, really long and the middle super dragged. At first, I didn't rate this as highly, but I've still been thinking about it all these months later, and so I'm going to put it kind of at the bottom of this is my jam. Nettle and Bone was a really quick fairy tale-esque story. I thought it was super cute. It wasn't crazy memorable or anything, but I had a really great time with it. So yeah, that's what I'm thinking right now. Arcane. This is a Netflix animated series that I think is based off of a video game, which I have never played. I cannot stop talking about this show. It is phenomenal. Some of the coolest animation that I've ever seen. The characters are so real feeling. And after episode 3, I was blown away. I was like, what are we watching? I keep Googling, like, when is it the next one? Like, when is season 2 going to come out? I cannot wait. I absolutely adore this show. I think it is so well plotted. It's just phenomenal, and I cannot wait to get more of this world. Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. This was a super cute, quick read. It is a cozy fantasy about an orc woman that wants to stop her adventuring lifestyle and open a coffee shop. It was absolutely adorable. I'm going to put that right there. The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. This is another fantasy trilogy that I read this year. It had some really good, powerful themes that it touched on, and the methods that the writer used to portray the story, as far as the writing style itself, was really unique and interesting. It wasn't one of my favorites of the year. I did love it. Yeah. I think that feels good. Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. This one, Project Hail Mary, was super fast paced. It was funny. It was heartfelt. Probably my favorite Andy Weir. I really, really loved this. Once again, this is just how I feel about these today. I'm sure if I ranked these in 3 hours or in 3 months, they would be very different, but I just have to go with my gut. Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. This is the book. I really enjoyed this. I thought it was super well written. It's about a pandemic that hits and wipes out most of humanity, and then a traveling troupe of like bards and musicians that are trying to make their way in the world 20 years after that event takes place. I thought it was pretty immaculate. And yeah, The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow. I felt very similar to this as I did to Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, where I absolutely loved the writing. I loved the story, but I also felt like it was kind of slow. So that's going to go right next to that. But I've still continued to think about it and loved it. A Natural History of Dragons is a 5-book series by Marie Brennan called The Memoirs of Lady Trent. It was absolutely written for me. I adore this series. I can't stop talking about it. So for that reason, I feel like it has to go in From the Rooftops. I was going to put it at the top of This Is My Jam, but honestly, it's higher than that. It's awesome. Circe by Madeline Miller is a mythological retelling about Circe, who was a character that had a slight cameo in the Odyssey. She is the protagonist of her own story in this. It's beautifully written. I listened to the audiobook, and the audiobook narrator definitely enhanced my reading experience for Circe. She was phenomenal, and the story is just really beautiful. I am definitely going to be reading more Madeline Miller in the future, so this is up there with like best of the year for sure. What We Do in the Shadows is a really silly, stupid show about vampires living in the modern age on Staten Island. It cracks me up, and I think this was like season 4 maybe that came out in 2022. It wasn't a super memorable season, so I'm just going to put it in reconsumable. It's funny. It makes me laugh. I don't think too much about it. Amphibia is another Disney series that I really enjoy the concept. I enjoy some of the stories that have been told with that show. I don't feel like this past season was super memorable, so it's also just going to go in reconsumable. Obi-Wan is a disappointment for me. I was really looking forward to Obi-Wan. I love Ian McGregor as an actor, and I just had really high hopes for this. I really wanted to see Obi-Wan just kicking ass and taking names in this show, and I really didn't feel like that happened until like the very last couple of episodes. I did love the little girl that played Leia, but I thought the writing for the show was really weak. So I could see myself rewatching this if the mood strikes, but it definitely was not as good as I wanted it to be. Exhalation by Ted Chiang is absolutely the best thing that I read this year. It was so good. At the time that I was reading it, I knew that it was one of the best things that I was reading, and I immediately after I was done reading it just wanted to talk to everyone about it, and it's months later and I still want to talk to everyone about it. I lent it to one of my friends. I think Ted Chiang is just a master of science fiction. I thought he touched on some really cool themes and he did it in really cool stories. I just love his mind and I can't wait to read more. Rick and Morty season whatever we're on, season 6 maybe. I love Rick and Morty. It's goofy, it's stupid, it's science fiction. I don't have much else to say. I don't feel like there were any episodes that really stuck out to me this season, but I will absolutely watch more Rick and Morty when it comes out. So, Station 11, the show. This was a bit of a disappointment for me. I did enjoy it, but because I read the book first, my expectations were just very off. I felt like the show took the basic premise and the character names and then changed literally everything else. And I didn't feel like any of the changes that they made were for the better of the story. My husband watched it without having read the book and he really enjoyed it. So I think it's just one of those reader versus watcher dynamics that just didn't hit for me as it might have if I had watched the show first. So I liked it at the time that I was watching it, but I'm probably not going to watch it again. The Witcher season 2, I believe came out in 2021, but I didn't watch it until 2022. The show confuses the hell out of me. I never feel like I understand what's going on. I haven't read any of the books or played the video games or anything like that, but I really enjoy the story when I do figure out what's going on, and the acting I think is really great, and I will definitely be watching more of it. So I'm gonna put it down here in reconsumable. Lightyear or Buzz Lightyear or whatever the name of that movie was that Pixar made this year. I wasn't even planning on watching it because it felt like a money grab, but then my brother watched it with my niece and he said it was really cute. So I did end up watching it and I enjoyed it. The kind of overall plot arc was pretty predictable and it felt a little formulaic, but I also thought that the relationships between the characters was really strong and probably the strongest point of the story. So I will definitely be rewatching that one. Turning Red is another Pixar cartoon that came out this year. It's about a middle school aged girl and her group of friends and dealing with kind of puberty as well as this like curse or magical ability that women in her family have where they turn into giant red pandas. It's silly, it's absurd. Didn't think it was awesome, but I did relate to the goofiness of being a middle school girl and could see myself rewatching it again in the future. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, the show. This was a BBC miniseries that was made after the book. I did feel that some parts of the show were better than the book, and I felt that some parts of the book were better than the show. Overall, I thought they did a good job with it. Watching it definitely enhanced my experience and relationship to the story. So that's just going to go in reconsumable. I could see myself watching it again. The House in the Cerulean Sea was a cozy fantasy story about an orphanage for magical children. I thought this felt a lot like a Hallmark movie. It was very predictable and I enjoyed myself while reading it, but I can't see myself rereading it. It didn't live up to the hype for me. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, I thought was okay. I didn't think that it dove into the themes as deeply as I wanted it to, but I would like to read the 1818 version at some point. I read the 1831 edition, which is changed somewhat from the original story, and I have heard that the 1818 version is better. So for that reason, I'm going to put it in reconsumable. Frankenstein, the movie, which came out in 19 whatever, really early on, 1930, I don't know. It was terrible and definitely not worth it. The whole time I was watching it, I was just like, what is this? It wasn't worth it. That's all I can say. Hocus Pocus 2 came out this year. I am a millennial. I grew up watching Hocus Pocus. I love that movie, even though it's goofy. And I had really low expectations for Hocus Pocus 2. I was not expecting it to be good. And then it was good. And I was like, oh, they did a really good job with this. I felt like they had enough callbacks to the original content while making it fresh and modern and making fun of itself. I just thought it was good, so I'll definitely be watching that again come Halloween time. The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. This is a trilogy. It absolutely lives in my brain. It is grimdark. It is horrific. It's just unforgettable, honestly. I was gripped. I did not know how the series was going to end until like 3 pages before it ended. I'm blown away by this story, and I can't wait to read more R.F. Kuang. The 22 Murders of Madison May was a thriller about a woman that is getting murdered in multiple parallel universes, and it's about the people who are hunting down her murderer as they hop through these different worlds. It was a very fun popcorn style read. I really enjoyed it, but it wasn't super memorable or anything like that, so could see myself reading it again. The Rings of Power. This is a hard one because I loved the visuals. The epic scale of the world and everything was great. I did feel like it felt like Lord of the Rings, especially with the Harfoots. I really enjoyed the Harfoot story, and I loved the story between Elrond and Durin. But everything else, the other two kind of stories that were happening in that show were pretty boring and unmemorable. I probably will watch another season of it if it comes out, but I'm probably never going to watch the first season again. So that's going to go in not again. Outer Range is an HBO show that's like paranormal sci-fi. It's very mysterious and dark, and the acting is fantastic, and it really gripped me at the beginning, but then it just kind of nothing happened for a long time. I honestly am not even sure that I finished the last episode of this show. I can't remember. So it could be a top show of all time, I think, for some people, but that some people is not me. So I'm just going to put it in not again. Squirrel Seeks Chipmunk by David Sedaris. This was a really cute series of short stories, but it was very forgettable. I read it in like 2 hours and don't see myself reading it again. So yeah. Lovecraft Country was a big disappointment to me. The story had a lot of potential, but it was kind of a series of related stories. Some of them were really interesting, some of them weren't. And then the ending for me just kind of flopped pretty hard. So I'm going to put this at the bottom of not again. The Siberiad by Stanislaw Lem. This is a series of absurdist science fiction short stories about 2 robots that live in a world of robots, and they're like genius engineers and inventors, and they get into all these different silly little scrapes, and it's about how they get out of those, and they compete with each other. It was cute and fun, but it was also, the stories got really repetitive. I don't think I'll be reading it again. Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. Not worth it. Yeah, I love a lot of Marvel movies, but I loved WandaVision. I thought that show was great. And I felt like at the end of WandaVision, they left Wanda in a sort of ambiguous sort of place. And then all of a sudden in the Multiverse of Madness, she's like an evil villain. And I don't know where that came from. That was not validated by the show that they did about her. And I don't think any of the rest of the plot of the Multiverse of Madness was worth it. So that is what it is. Thor, Love and Thunder, also not worth it. Thought the acting was terrible. Thought the plot kind of sucked. I mean, I didn't feel like it had a whole lot of redeeming qualities other than like Marvel special effects. My husband liked it, so I'm sure I will rewatch it at some point, but if it was up to me, I would not be rewatching it. Avatar, The Way of Water. I saw this in theaters with the whole 3D experience. It was freaking awesome. I loved the first movie. I loved the second movie. The second movie is very similar to the first one, but had enough different elements to keep it still kind of fresh. And the family dynamics and relationships I thought were a lot stronger in this movie. I thought it did some things definitely better than the first movie. So yeah, it was totally my jam. I loved it. The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This is a fantasy story about a magical circus with some romance and some competition. It was a disappointment. It did not live up to the hype. I don't see myself rereading it. So I thought it was kind of boring. Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. This is a trilogy and it is freaking awesome. If they do not make a movie about this series, it will be an absolute crime. This was the coolest magic system that I've read all year. It had some of the coolest fantastical creatures that were introduced. It did really interesting and unique kind of plotting where consequences of actions were heavily taken into account. I just thought this was fantastic across the board. Absolutely from the rooftops. I think anyone who likes fantasy should read Mistborn. Everything Everywhere All at Once. I think I just watched this on like New Year's Eve, so it barely made the cut for this video, but I had heard really good things about it. I heard it was really sad, and that was pretty much all I knew to expect. But so I had no idea how hilarious this movie was. I was cracking up like the entire time I was watching it, and I also teared up at the end. This gets really high praise from me. I think this is everything that a multiverse story should be. It was absurd and just epic. I loved it. These Prisoning Hills is a short novella. It's like apocalyptic about a woman that lives in Appalachia after this AI has like taken over and destroyed the entire Southeast. It's super rad. I absolutely loved it and definitely think more people should be reading it. Before the Coffee Gets Cold, this is kind of a magical realism time travel tale. It has like 4 different stories about people who travel to this cafe to go back in time. It felt a little repetitive, and I enjoyed my experience while reading it, but don't see myself rereading it. Lark Ascending by Silas House. Absolutely one of the best books of the year. Lark Ascending is about a young man in a post-apocalyptic kind of dystopian America, and he is trying to escape the United States in order to seek refuge as a cultural and climate change refugee. And the writing was just absolutely stunning. I loved it. Oh my gosh, these last 4. This is great. This is the Expanse series by James S.A. Corey. This is a 9-book series, and I cannot stop talking about it. If you've been on my channel for a while, you've heard about it already. I read all 9 books this year, and it is so freaking epic. Stranger Things Season 4, fantastic. Absolutely loved it. It was more horror than I think the previous 3 seasons were. So if you haven't watched it yet, 1, where have you been? And 2, just be prepared for that. I felt like it was scarier, I think, than the first 3 seasons, but it was so good. And I cannot wait for season 5. The Expanse season 6 came out this past year and was the conclusion to the Expanse TV show. This TV show covers books 1 through 6 in the 9-book series. And it is one of the best science fiction television shows that I have ever watched. I can't believe more people have not gotten on the Expanse train. It is fantastic. If you like science fiction, if you like Star Trek and Battlestar Galactica, you know, that kind of stuff, like this is the show for you. Watch The Expanse. I want to talk to you about it. Oh my gosh, I don't know how to arrange these. It's too much. I'm not going to think about it too hard. All right, and then Spider-Man Far From Home. I freaking loved this. It's a Marvel movie. It's popcorny, but God, when they do it well, they do it so well. This is one of my favorite Marvel movies of all time. Spider-Man has always been one of my favorite superheroes. I watched the Spider-Man animated series when I was growing up, and I watched the Tobey Maguire movies when I was growing up, and then I watched the Andrew Garfield movies and the Tom Holland movies. Even though I don't think all of the movies have been done very well, all 3 of those actors have been excellent Spider-Man / Peter Parker portrayals, and I thought they all did so well putting their own spin on the character. The fact that all 3 of those actors came back and they had all these inside jokes, like calling back to the other movies, it was funny and heartfelt, and I had such a good time watching that movie. So it might not be top tier in terms of any real metrics, but in terms of my enjoyment, it was fantastic. So that, I think, is my 2022 fantasy and sci-fi tier list. You can see that my rankings are pretty heavily weighted towards the top. I absolutely loved a ton of the stuff that I watched or read this year. So I just feel super good about 2022 and the types of content that I got to see. All right, well, that's it for my 2022 fantasy and sci-fi tier list. Let me know what some of your favorite fantasy and sci-fi was. What were your S tier from the rooftops list for 2022? Thanks for watching. As always, be kind, read books, and hit the subscribe button below for more bookish content to come.